Well, I've been a political commentator for about 17 years now. I started it off, I used to be a stockbroker, and right around 2001, 2002, the industry was becoming incredibly litigious, which it is now. I had been doing it for a decade, never got a lawsuit. It was great, but it was just going to get stupid. So I left and I started with a investor relations company with a friend of mine, also a former broker. And doing that, we were going online, doing reviews of stocks and companies in the stock market. And I was doing the online input. And we saw this thing called web blogs. This is about 2005, 2006. I'm like, what are these web blog things? And we looked into that. And so we started up like 150 different websites, which I managed. I wrote for all of them and I kept them up to date, learned how to do HTML and all that. And in doing that and learning how to write it, so the first thing I did is I started up a page for myself, my little test page. And it was just meant to be various little thoughts of mine every so often, just to test it out. As it wound up, it became more and more political. Some entertainment, but also more political. And as I was developing the other 150 websites, I was reading through a lot of information. I had already been political and involved as a broker and just in my life. But then I just got more and more and seeing more and more of the political connections of everything. And my political voice came out more and more. So then I just followed it up. 17 years later, I've talked to presidential vice presidents, candidates for the vice presidency of the United States, Dr. Art Laffer, members of Congress, candidates of every party for every office from local, state, and federal here in the United States. I've spoken at colleges. I've been a featured speaker at various events, ran for Congress in 2014, ran for a county legislator, and which is a just under a state level position in 2020. So I've done a few things from it. It gives you a broad view.
Yeah, you ran for Congress. How was that experience?
I recommend to everyone, get involved in politics, run if you don't agree with what's going on, but be aware it is a pain in the buttocks. It is bitter and twisted and not fun the first time, but it is worth it. I needed to raise back in 2014. I believed that if I could have gotten $100,000, I would have won. They were terrified of me because I was running. I'm a Republican, a conservative Republican. I was running against a candidate, Mr. Richard Hanna, who has since passed, who is not a Republican, but ran under the Republican ticket. So I pissed off all the Republicans in my region. They hated me. Still do. Because I took on their guy, who was a Republican in name only, what we call a rhino. But I wanted to emphasize the issues that he was not, to point out the things that we needed to do as a party and as a community to make things better. I achieved part of that. I highlighted a lot of things, and I helped a friend of mine, Claudia Tenney, who became a congresswoman and is currently a congresswoman, to get into the race, to challenge him, and eventually she won. And she's been able to help push through some of the things that I think helps the country. Sometimes you run not to win, but to point out the problems and maybe to help someone who is, she could raise millions of dollars. She was more connected to individuals than I was. She was already elected in office. She had roughly about 80% of the things I believe she believed. So she was a close match. She was able to do the job better than I could. And I helped to convince her to, yeah, this is the time, go for it. And it's worked out well. Sometimes that's why you run. You run to challenge, to point out the problems, and maybe to help someone who is, she could raise millions of dollars. She was more connected to individuals than I was. She was already elected in office. She had roughly about 80% of the things I believe she believed. So she was a close match. She was able to do the job better than I could. And I helped to convince her to, yeah, this is the time, go for it. And it's worked out well. not to win, but to improve things or to highlight things. So I recommend it to people, but no doubt it's a pain, it's expensive, and it's not fun. It's cost me relationships, business. It's cost me a lot, but it's worth it.
Well, it's more of a politics is more of a lifestyle rather than anything else. You need to commit 110%. You can't just commit 100%. You need to go sort of above and beyond. At least if you're there to try and at least make an impact.
If you're
So,
trying to make an impact,
what year was that when you ran for Congress?
2004, 2013, 2014, I spent that entire year. Yeah, it's hard when you're going for, in the United States, we have Congress. I think it's like an MP for you guys. Uh, um, so it's the same kind of equivalent where you're going out to your community. A congressman in the United States right now represents about 750,000 people. The way they did the boxes, the districts in the time, we had a district that went north to south was about 2.5 hours travel time north to south, and about 2 hours east to west. And that was 700, roughly 720,000, 750,000 people. It was about 7 counties, which is a lot. And to put it in perspective for you guys, that's the distance approximately of going from London to Paris, about the time frame. So that's the district. That's a lot of ground to cover as just a regular average working Joe who has, I'm poor. I'm poor. I was poor then, I'm poor now. And that's a lot of traveling. It's a very expensive thing.
So it was you being a stockbroker which sort of pushed you towards politics.
Well, let's see. I'm also former military. I'm a Marine, and my dad was a Marine before me. My family have various military. Um, I've lived overseas, and then I became a stockbroker, and then I went into the rest of the things I was talking about. I've been through most natural disasters. I've been through earthquakes, floods, fires. I've been involved or experienced riots, attempted coups. I've lived in Moscow back in 91. You may recall, or actually, you guys are a little younger, so you probably read about Moscow when Gorbachev, the attempted coup that happened. I was actually in Moscow when that happened. In Georgia, Soviet Georgia, Gruzia, as it's called. I was living there when Komsomolets was deposed, and the students rose up and had their riots, and they were shooting across the street. They were shooting rocket launchers across the street at each other. It's stupid. They tried to kidnap me. It was a whole experience. And all of that before I actually ever wrote a political thing. So I was always rather conservative and Republican leaning in my viewpoint. It just took all of that for me to say, well, let me actually let my voice out.